Constitutional law. What are the ethical and moral dilemmas over historical figures? In the past 2 years, there has been an increase in social movements, such as movements like Black Lives Matter and the anti-war movement. Directly related, criticism has been brought up surrounding statues of historical figures and what they actually represent. Such criticism highlights reasons as to why people may want these statues to be taken down, while some argue that these statues represent actions that cannot be forgotten. And so, in this video, we will look at some reasons why people want statues of historical figures to be taken down, why people want to keep these statues, and our own opinion on whether they should be removed or not. Please be aware that the last section is our opinion, and feel free to disagree and use the comment section as an area of discussion, but keep the comments peaceful and respectful. So, do statues of historical figures represent historical injustices that are currently ongoing? The short answer is yes, but it is complicated. For many of these historical figures, which have almost been immortalized in the form of statues, there are both good and bad sides. The fact that these statues have been reconstructed as statues gives insight into what they may have done. As you expect, a community has seen and is recognizing an act or acts which they have commenced during their lifetime. Unfortunately, at the same time, many of these historical figures also committed historical injustices, and whether it was with good intentions or not is up to debate. Additionally, these historical injustices take an infinitely longer amount of time to resolve than it took to create, and so in some ways these statues do represent historical injustices, and they may have been a part of supporting or creating these ideologies. So, what are some views on why people want statues of historical figures to be taken down? As of more recent times, people have been advocating for the removal of statues of historical figures. But what are their reasons? The first argument that is very common is that the historical figure has committed actions which are unethical or repugnant. Whether it be directly committing slavery, trafficking, or passing bills which are inherently racist, such as the Chinese head tax and the Indian Act, or that they committed a war crime. The second point extends off the first point, in that statues are a representation of a community or country's values and someone that the community should strive to be. Some people also see that these statues only depict them as heroes, people who have only done good things for a community. At the same time, there's another perspective of this second point, where some believe that these statues will be interpreted as disrespectful towards communities that may have been directly affected by the historical figure's actions. And so, the argument towards why people want these statues to be removed are about the fact that many have committed unethical actions in the past, and those actions subsequently can be imposed or negatively affect a community. So, why do people want to keep these statues? At the same time, there are many who argue that these statues should be kept. Firstly, and probably the most publicized argument, is that these historical statues represent great achievements throughout history. An example of this is the John A. Macdonald statue in Victoria, which honors John A. Macdonald for Canada's Confederation, him being the first Prime Minister and building the Canadian Pacific Railway. Secondly, some argued that these disgraceful acts cannot be quote-unquote swept under the rug, and must be recognized to reconcile. Removing the statues can lead to people forgetting the brutal history and what has happened in the past. Less talked about but still important ideas discussed were that these statues represent more important historical events or actions that need to be remembered and can allow for people or communities to heal. Additionally, some also argue that these statues can be conversation starters for discussing difficult issues, learning about how to progress/continue to develop, or used as a teaching tool. And so, the arguments towards not removing these historical statues are that they represent great progressions in human history, and although there have been unethical actions committed, it still must be recognized to allow for healing and to be remembered. These statues also stand to be conversation starters for difficult ideas or topics. So what is our opinion on the statues? Just briefly before, just be aware that this section is where we'll express our opinion, and you are free to disagree. And again, you can use the comments section as an area of discussion, but again, keep the comments peaceful and respectful. So, we understand that humans are complex creatures, and especially because there are valid arguments and concerns on both sides of the question, and therefore, we believe a simple answer is not fitting for such a difficult question. For us, we see that these historical figures have in the past committed acts which are now commonly considered to be unethical. While not all of these historical figures fall under this categorization, many, we believe, are being judged or scrutinized with modern day social norm, which has evolved with time, and we also do not think it is an accurate or fair judgment. This issue arises for the removal for the reason that it does not align with current social norms, and beliefs would lead to all historical figures not being recognized for any of their actions, that being good or bad, and leaves these actions that may have been incorrectly absent to the future generations to learn, and leading to history repeating itself. We understand that statues can be seen as a representation of a community or a country's values, which some will try to follow. We believe most understand that not everything someone does is going to align with social norms, and that should not be a reason to discredit someone's great work. But it may be useful to alter how these historical figures are presented to give a more neutral presentation, or to find ways to display more background information on these historical figures. This would assist those communities healing, prevent history from being forgotten, and allow everyone to see that these historical figures were also people, not gods or heroes. In conclusion, we debated the ethical and moral dilemmas over historical figures and showed arguments towards both the removal and preservation of these historical statues. We first questioned whether historical figures represent historical injustices that are currently ongoing, and came up with a complex answer to a complex question. We found that, in short, yes. However, many of the historical figures which have statues both ethical and unethical qualities about them, and that they should not be targeted solely because of their negatives. They should be honored because of their positives, while still acknowledging their negatives. Secondly, we explained multiple points of views on this subject, mainly whether we should preserve or remove the statues. We believe that there are valid points for both arguments. However, we think that these historical figures committed acts in the past, and society has changed drastically throughout history, and therefore you cannot fairly judge these historical figures. This issue could lead to all historical figures not being recognized for any of their actions, whether that's good or bad, thus allowing history to repeat ourselves. Thank you.